You have to picture the sheer scale of the intellectual rupture that shook the ancient world in the 1st century BCE. We are looking at a profound, catastrophic fracture of the Hellenistic academia. And this wasn't just some minor academic squabble, right? This was a rigorous, full-blown epistemological rebellion. Leading this insurgency was a thinker named Aenesidemus, who looked at the creeping dogmatism festering inside these elite philosophical institutions and decided to systematically dismantle it. By tearing down these foundations of certainty, he resurrected a methodology of structured doubt, one that would permanently alter the landscape of classical literature and philosophy.
When you read the text, you immediately see that the secession by Aenesidemus wasn't just a casual drift away from Platonism. It was a highly orchestrated engineering project. He was deliberately resurrecting a radical, completely non-dogmatic intellectual paradigm that he traced all the way back to Pyrrhon. The text paints a picture of an era infected by a creeping certitude, this really dangerous comfort with absolute truths. So this movement emerges for one specific reason, to sever ties with that institutional orthodoxy. And they didn't deploy doubt just to be passive or confused. No, they weaponized it as a systematic tool to crush philosophical arrogance.
Section 1. Reclaiming the Pyrrhonist Revival. The secession of Aenesidemus. Let's dive right into the formal initiation of this rebellion and how the text frames its intellectual lineage.
Looking closely at the primary source, Aenesidemus strategically positions his new methodology as a direct reclamation of authentic practice, explicitly linking his work back to Pyrrhon. What he's doing here is aggressively stripping away all those heavy metaphysical accretions, all those unprovable theories about reality that had basically compromised the integrity of the academia. The text distinctive frames this pivot as a total recalibration of philosophical inquiry. He isn't just offering up a new set of counter-doctrines to fight the old ones. Instead, the focus violently narrows to the immediate epistemological boundaries of human perception. He is entirely excising any presumption of an inherent cosmic truth, focusing strictly on what can actually be experienced.
Section 2. Secession from the academia. Forging an autonomous movement. It's absolutely crucial we understand the cultural pressures that forced this split in the first place.
Because you see, for generations leading up to this text, the academia had steadily ossified into this rigid repository of positive doctrines, largely buckling under the immense weight of Stoic certitudes. Aenesidemus literally had no choice but to establish a fiercely independent movement. When we trace the historical transmission in the text, from the initial schism in Athens during the 1st century BCE, across the Mediterranean, all the way to its arrival in Rome by 65 CE, we see a highly deliberate tactic at play. By remaining operational, but explicitly esoteric, they were strategically cultivating obscurity, right on the periphery of Roman hegemony. It was a brilliantly designed survival mechanism, a structural shield to prevent being absorbed by the massive, dogmatic intellectual machines of the Roman elite.
Section 3. From metaphysics to dialectics, the theoretical transition. Now we get into the actual textual mechanics of how this revived skepticism operated differently from its predecessors.
There's a definitive methodological evolution here that separates this text from earlier works. While the original skepticism of Pyrrhon rested on the claim that the cosmos was inherently indeterminate, this new movement establishes a brutally strict adversarial demarcation. On one side of the text's framework, we have the adila. These represent the non-evident, underlying true natures of objects. The revived skeptics completely, totally suspend judgment on the adila. But then, on the other side, we have the phenomena, the immediate, uncontested sensory appearances. The methodology here firmly refuses all ontological speculation about the adila. Instead, it relies entirely on a dialectical exploitation of sensory illusion found strictly within the phenomena.
Moving to Section 4, the ethics of appearance, navigating biological and civic obligations. Now, you might be wondering, if a practitioner suspends judgment on literally everything, how do they even function day to day?
The text systematically counters the pervasive critique that suspending judgment leads to total paralysis. How? By establishing the phenomenon as the practical criterion for action. It's a brilliant workaround. It allows the individual to navigate daily biological needs and civic customs perfectly well, but without ever needing to endorse those actions as absolute underlying dogmatic truths. By adhering strictly to the phenomenon, the text generates a localized, highly pragmatic morality. It essentially gives you permission to participate in society entirely devoid of the intellectual friction and, quite frankly, the exhaustion caused by trying to violently defend absolute moral dogmas.
Section 5. The 10 dialectical modes, the systematization of skepticism. This right here is the internal logical zenith of the entire revival.
The text lays out the decatropi, the 10 modes, formulated by Aenesidemus. These function as a precise, methodical algorithm of doubt. They systematically march through the relativity of human perception to forcefully demonstrate that any given object is going to produce entirely contradictory impressions, entirely depending on the medium of observation. The decatropi meticulously point out how an object appears differently to disparate animal species, how it shifts based on anatomical variations between humans, how divergent sensory organs process the exact same stimuli differently, how environmental contexts completely alter perception, and how irreconcilable cultural customs shape our judgments. It is an absolutely devastating, systematic dismantling of the idea that humans possess some privileged objective access to reality.
And the inevitable outcome of applying the decatropi leads directly into epoche. The text designs these 10 modes to completely obliterate the possibility of an objective criterion of truth. Once you take any dogmatic claim and run it through this rigorous dialectical algorithm, the intellect is forced into a state of total cognitive gridlock. And it's that very gridlock that induces epoche, the involuntary, profound cessation of all dogmatic assent. Notice that word, involuntary. You don't consciously choose to suspend judgment. The sheer structural force of the argument compels your intellect to surrender. It triggers a complete paralysis of the dogmatic impulse.
Finally, Section 6, the legacy of suspension, the epistemological outcome. Let's examine the radical psychological and historical consequences born out of this text's dialectical method.
Reaching this state of epoche yields a beautiful, profound paradox within the text. It naturally progresses to aphasia, a state of complete speechlessness, a total non-assertion regarding ultimate reality. You literally have no words left to describe the hidden nature of the universe. Now, critics assumed this silence would lead to profound existential despair, but the text argues the exact opposite. Through the total, catastrophic exhaustion of the anxious search for absolute truth, the practitioner unexpectedly achieves ataraxia, profound intellectual tranquility, and, as Aenesidemus uniquely suggests, actual pleasure. Peace isn't found by answering the ultimate questions. It is found by systematically destroying the very need to ask them.
The structural blueprint laid down in this text by Aenesidemus cemented a philosophical paradigm that permanently interrogates the very foundations of human knowledge. It leaves us with a compelling, lingering question. If pure tranquility, ataraxia, is achieved precisely by abandoning our obsessive search for absolute truth, how does this methodical surrender act as a permanent corrosive check against the dogmatisms embedded in our own contemporary landscape? It challenges us to keep questioning and to relentlessly scrutinize the very things we think we know for sure.